Hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Kim, Creative Director for Patient Experience and Engagement at BBK Worldwide, here with another episode of Pharma15 Live. I'm joined today by Michele Russell-Einhorn. She is the Chief Compliance Officer and an institutional official at Advarra, a premier institutional review board in North America. Welcome, Michele.
Hi, thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and I appreciate you including me in this series. So Advarra's primary service for a really long time has been institutional review board review, but now we have institutional biosafety and technology. So the company is growing.
Great. That's good to hear, especially during this time.
Right.
Yeah. So we're here today to discuss engaging underserved populations in clinical research. Here at BBK, we're getting a lot of questions on this topic from sponsor clients who are looking to make their studies more diverse and inclusive. So Michele, are institutional review boards now evaluating protocols for diversity and inclusion? And do you feel like it's often too late by the time the protocol comes to the institutional review board for review?
So one of the specific 111 criteria for IRB review is to make sure that subject selection is equitable. If a research protocol is being conducted in an urban area and the exclusion criteria says that you have to be able to speak English, the IRB always, I mean, this is pre-pandemic, should raise a question about why would you restrict the protocol to only individuals who speak English when 50% of the urban population where this is being conducted are Spanish-speaking individuals. So I would like to think that IRBs have always felt empowered to ask that question. The problem with the language issue is that it's a resource issue for investigators. You know, how do they have the resources to have informed consent forms translated or to use what we commonly call short form consents? And then it doesn't stop there, because you've got to have interpreter services during the protocol. Just because you conduct the consent process in somebody's language doesn't mean you get to forget about it afterwards. You have to make sure that you have resources following that. You know, one of the interesting things from the pandemic is that a lot of research was clinic in hospital based research, right? And then the pandemic hits and all of a sudden we have this move to telemedicine, to having home health visits for the conduct of the research. And what I think we've seen as a result of that is that indeed that actually was something that supported the inclusion of a more diverse population. That if you looked at the procedures outlined in a protocol and it said, oh, 12 times you're going to have to come to the clinic or the hospital or, you know, the office to get some study treatment, that's a huge amount of time for an individual to take, to travel, to leave work. But if they can stay home, and forget that we're all on Zoom right now, right? But even just to not have to travel so far means that you have the likelihood of engaging a more diverse population in the research. That said, for an IRB to question at the time of IRB review, do you really need 12 procedures to be done at your clinic? Is there a way for you to incorporate telemedicine or visits by home health aides? I think it's a reasonable thing for the IRB to suggest. I would be hard pressed for an IRB to actually require that change because it's so integral to the protocol design. And it's something that could affect the integrity of the research, how the research is being envisioned and whatever, but it doesn't mean that it can't be suggested. And I do think that that's an appropriate route for an IRB to go.
And what are some early considerations that study sponsors can start to think about while designing their clinical trials to be more diverse and inclusive?
Right. So I think that it's important to think about your catchment area. Where are you going to do your recruiting? What are your clinics and your health centers? Are they located in areas that will pull a diverse population? And also look at your procedural requirements. You know, will the procedures dissuade people from wanting to participate in the research because of the travel commitments, because of the time commitments, especially now that we have the pandemic to give us some data on remote technologies, telemedicine, and also visits by home health aides. Are there ways to, substitute for in-office visits, other ways of participating in the research? It's this whole concept of, now, are decentralized trials really the model we should be aiming for, where not everything is really taking place at a site, but there's aspects to the research that can be conducted at a participant's home or at a location even that's closer to the participant. So I think those are some of the considerations that can be considered at early protocol design. The other thing I'll say is just that when you look at inclusion exclusion criteria and it's very specific, and it says, this has to be done on day 3 and this has to be done on day 6, it actually may be important for the research, and if that's the case, you need to have it in there. But if you have a window, plus or minus, you actually do impact whether, because again, if you have participants who live far away, who have travel issues, who have childcare problems, who have work commitments or whatever, the more specific you are about when something has to be done in the research, the more likely you are to either consent a subject and have them withdraw because it's just too difficult for them to comply with the protocol requirements, or you don't even get people to agree to participate because they look at what's required and they think, you know what, this just isn't going to fit with my schedule.
What is the IRB's view on things such as hotspots or iPhones being provided to some of these more underserved populations in order to be involved in a clinical research, especially when, they may not have access to internet or, a smartphone?
Exactly, right. And, digital health is something, digital technology and the incorporation of digital technology in research is something we've seen expand over the last couple of years. There's no prohibition on providing iPads, iPhones, Apple Watches, anything you want in the context of research, if it's related to the research and in order to facilitate a participant. What you really have to think about is, well, then what? So does the participant get to own it? Does the participant have to return it? Is there some penalty? I hate to use that word, but truly, like it, an IRB would probably not look kindly on the word penalty, but what are you going to do if an iPhone is not returned? If there's no financial cost to the participant and nothing else arises, then it shouldn't be a problem at all. But if a sponsor is going to contemplate some kind of consequence, you have to be very careful with that, because the IRB is going to say, well, if you want people to participate, and in order to participate, they need to have an iPad, and you're going to give them the iPad, but then you're going to expect them to give it back to you. And if they don't, you're going to withhold this other compensation. And IRB might not look kindly on that quid pro quo. But that said, once again, to wrap that up, there's no prohibition on providing participants with those devices. Don't forget that in the device world, right, when we've talked for decades about, hip replacements and knee replacements and stents and all sorts of other things that are actually devices, these have been provided to participants as part of their participation in research. So when we think about iPads and iPhones and hotspots, they aren't going in people's bodies, but they're devices that are being used to facilitate the conduct of the research.
How can institutional review boards help to better ensure there is inclusion and diversity in clinical trials?
So again, let's go back to that urban community where the consent and the protocol come in and say that it's restricted to English-speaking participants only, and the urban population is, let's say close to 40–50% Hispanic and Spanish-speaking. That would be entirely appropriate for the IRB to say that, your subject selection in this protocol is not equitable given the geographical area from which you're going to be doing your recruiting. So I think an IRB has a very important role to play. There are definitely issues that it can raise. There are things that it can require as changes, but I also think that I'm all for an IRB providing advice and guidance as it reviews research that could be used by by a study sponsor down the road for future research.
Right, right. Very good points. And I think it'll be very helpful for our sponsors to hear this and really utilize, the information that you've given today. So thank you, Michelle. We really appreciate you taking the time to really share your thoughts on this subject.
And thank you very much for touching on this topic, because it's a really important topic. It's always been there. We see it more now because of the pandemic, and we need to keep talking about it and not forget how significant this is and how much of a positive impact it can make on clinical research for us to pursue this topic.